Morning, everybody. Hope you've had restful sleep. We're going to get started. So welcome to the first session slot of IETF 118 in Prague. This is Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group, and we have a 2-hour session for you. The agenda is up, and I'll walk you through some of our introductory materials. Just checking if my co-chair is online. Sophia Selly is the co-chair of HRPC with me, and she's not able to be in person. Hoping that she will come online at some point. So welcome. So this is our agenda for today. We have 3 talks. We have Ahmad Al-Sadeh online, who's going to start us off. We have also another online speaker from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And then in person, we're happy to welcome Stephanie from the UNFPA, which is the agency in the UN responsible for gender rights and gender justice. So then we have a few small matters for the research group at the end, a couple drafts, a bit of a discussion, but that's how we'll spend our time together. So just a few reminders. You need to make sure you capture the QR code with your mobile phone to sign in for the blue sheets. You can also do it by logging in with your laptop. We're being recorded. That's an important thing to note. This recording will go up on YouTube eventually. Thank you very much to Corey, who's going to take notes for us. We're going to be capturing in the notes only the discussion that follows the talks, since the slides are available online, and any discussion we have at the end around our research group drafts. And so for Q&A, when that happens after each talk and at the end, please, if you can use the Meet Echo Q. So going back to capturing this QR code, it gives you a tool that you can then raise your hand, and then you can also then come to the mics that are in the aisle. That allows us to make sure we can get people that are joining us online as well as in person in the same queue. Since this is the beginning of the week, you may not have seen these slides yet. The note well are essentially things you need to consider when you're participating in IETF meetings. There's a few different sections to the note well. The first is around intellectual property. So if there's any discussion where you hold intellectual property rights on, or you know someone else does, you need to note that well and actually say something. We've already gone over this, but we're recording this, audio and video recordings, which is a good thing. But you need to make sure that if you're wearing a red lanyard or you have a red dot or however you've indicated that if you come to the mic, you'll be captured on video. Another important section of the note well is around code of conduct. So we do have guidance for conduct in meetings, interims, and meetings like this one on the list and so on. And you should be aware of that if you're not already. You can click through and learn more. So this is a research group. We're part of the Engineering Research Task Force here, and we're focused, the IRTF in general is focused on longer term research issues related to the internet. The IETF working group meetings you'll go to are more focused on the engineering and standard setting. We are conducting research. We are talking about research related issues. We are not developing standards in this meeting. All of the documents, the one RFC from this research group 8280, these are informational documents. Again, we're exploring issues. You can learn more about the IRTF in 7418. So yes, so we are human rights protocol considerations. We've been chartered since 2016, I believe. This reflects our current charter. We're just making connections between human rights and protocols, but we're specifically focusing on the human rights to free expression and free assembly. You can imagine right to information, being one in there as well. We don't as much talk about the right to privacy, although that would be an obvious one, simply because there's another research group that focuses on privacy. We work with them very much. We're really just trying to be helpful in developing guidance for how to design things that are rights respecting, and really just thinking that through. And we need, all the help we can get. The folks that come to present here, the folks that bring their research here, are from science and technology studies. They're from human rights community. They're from the technical community, measurement community, et cetera. It's a really eclectic group because there are a lot of different issues that we've considered. So we have a few folks that are involved in this. I already mentioned Sophia and I are the co-chairs. We also have two technical advisors that are always really helpful. Daniel Kahn-Gilmore and Melinda Shore have been doing that. Actually, they were appointed at the last time we were in Prague, so that's been a few years now. Nick Doty has been a doc shepherd for us, specifically on an active draft. We have a draft association. And then, of course, Colin is really helpful as the chair of the IRTF in all things. We have these three active internet drafts of the research group now. We just, between the last meeting and now, we've added the intimate partner violence digital considerations draft to our research group after the adoption call. And I think that's the end of my slides, which is great because we always run out of time in this research group. And so I'm happy to end early. Just checking the chat. Okay, great. Good morning to you too, Jane. Okay, great. So we're going to start then with our first speaker. So Ahmad, if you want to get online and try to get your own slides up, again, if they don't work, I can cue them for you.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, by sharing screen or sharing the slides?
I think if you share the preloaded slides, your slides should be in. Your slides should be there.
Okay. But I'm not quite sure. Material. Okay, so just a minute.
That was on me. I hadn't approved you to do that, but now you should be good.
Okay. Yeah, this.
Perfect. We can see your slides. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Ahmed Sadeh from Birzeit University in Palestine. I'm also the chair of ISOC Palestine chapter. So how to move between this? Okay. The importance of the internet, but the situation in Palestine and Gaza, we will just focus on very basic things like helping the people to connect to each other during this emergency situation and maybe save their lives. So we will not talk about the job opportunities or just get fun or anything else. As you may know, the internet, the United Nations declared that the internet access goes to be like a human right, even they didn't approve it completely. How they do not agree how to implement this term as the internet as a human right. This is done in 2016, and recently, of the beginning of this year, 2013, they still they argue that it should be like a human right. It's not just like a privilege. So just to emphasize that the importance of the internet for the people. So I will talk in this talk. I will talk more specific about the ICT infrastructure in Palestine and how Israeli controls this infrastructure. But before that, I will just give a very quick overview about the situation and how the agreements between Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government done there. So according to Oslo Accords, they divide the regions in three parts. Three parts. The first part is Area A, which is completely under, quote unquote, completely under the control of Palestinian Authority. Even this area is not completely actually under the Palestinian control. Area B, which form about 22%, fell under Palestinian civil control, but for the security control, it should be joined between Palestinian and Israeli, but in practice, it is controlled completely by Israeli. Area C, which is the reset and the majority, which is from about 60% of the West Bank is and Gaza, West Bank, Gaza completely should be under the Palestinian Authority control. It's controlled by Israeli from civilian and military. So this is very important because I will mention that later on because this discrete spots here and there in the West Bank also limit the building the infrastructure in the West Bank. So one of the first limitation that put from Israeli side is to restrict the frequency of the technology. So if we compare here this is Jawal. Jawal is the one Jawal and Wataniya or Orido. So two mobile operator, main mobile operator in Palestine. And the spectrum they get it from the agreement. While this Silicom is an Israeli company, and you can see the difference between what is given to the Israel side and what is given to the Palestinian companies. So from the beginning, they restrict the frequency, and also they limit the access to technologies beside the frequency. So it takes around 10 years from the beginning or the initial request to move to the 3G frequencies, and it made only just in 2018 in West Bank only. In Gaza Strip only till this moment they work in 2G with the out-of-dated equipments actually, because they restrict the importing any equipment to Gaza. I will talk about the importing equipments in the next slide. To this day, the 4G is not operated in Palestine, and according to the agreements between Israel and Palestinian Authority, it should be launched by the end of 2013. But to be honest, I'm not optimistic about that, and it will not launch it. So I expect the same scenario which happened with the when we moved from 2G to the 3G. Just to give an idea, how many operators, how many SIM actually users for Jawal and Orido in Palestine is 4.3 million subscribers. So actually, also they limit the access to technologies. So it is not it's not easy to import any equipments like switches, the towers, any telecommunication equipment to the areas in which is even under full control of Palestinian Authority, and even more, they not allow the Palestinian Authority companies like Jawal and Orido to build their network elements and build them in data centers inside the full control area, which is Area A. So for this reason, they build it outside, and this is make it for to cost a lot in operation. So for Jawal, it is in England and Jordan. For Wataniya, it's in East Jerusalem. And for Gaza, all the links to the external or international routes goes via Israel. So they control the international gateways completely for the communication. Moreover, they also restrict important necessary equipments. So for Gaza, till more than 10 years, they not allowed to enter anything, even cement and wood for necessary for construction of the ITC companies. And any import equipment to West Bank also should be checked carefully. And they called it about dual use. So if this equipment could be used for other purposes like military purposes, then they will block it. And there, in fact, there is no clear or fixed rule for that. So they just may delay the equipment and just to stay in the port for a very long time. This is what happened with when they Jawal import the equipment for 3G. So this is make a digital gap between Palestinian because the Palestinian people, because they are not able to import the up-to-date technologies and equipment to Palestine. Okay. Another way how the Israeli abuse the Palestinian digital rights by limiting the access to the internet. So if we return back to the area A and area B and area C, according to the Oslo Accords, area C is completely under the Israeli control, but for the main companies like Wataniya and Jawal to work there, they need to, and for optimal setting, they need to put towers in these areas, but they are not allowed to put. They at least need to put 330 towers in the area C for optimal coverage, but they are not allowed to do that. So their coverage is limited inside the Palestinian cities, which is in area A. So this is the situation in West Bank. In Gaza, it is more worse actually, because they are not even enter any equipment allowed to enter any equipment to Gaza. And I would say this is a very clear violation for freedom of expression and information access and usage. Another way to look at this abuse is the right to privacy, because Israeli monitor and tracking Palestinian intensively with they put a camera in the checkpoint and everywhere to record the Palestinian movement. Also, they collect a lot of information about the Palestinian, and even they use this information to employ collaborators for spying to work with them by using this information to force them to join and collaborate with them. And there is a unit. It's called 8200, which is Israeli army unit that monitor the Palestinians and activities. So it is like a cyber activity unit. And I didn't put it here, but there was a news that many of the old workers there denied to work in this unit because this severe surveillance to the Palestinian people. Also, they use automatic phone calls. So because the international gateways and the data centers are also located in some of them in Israel and pass it through Israel, so they control the phones and they use it to send text messages for people in Gaza to evacuate or to send their their information to the people, to spread their information to the people, to the messages that they want. So they receive automatic messages in their phone in Gaza. In addition, they use this famous program called or technology Pegasus to spy on a smartphone of Palestinians. Okay, and moreover, actually, they target Israel target many Palestinians through the social media profiles. So recently, after October 7, they arrest 161 Palestinian citizens, and some of them lost their job actually because they just post something on the social media, or they just arrested actually. I mean, here the people who lost their jobs mainly in Jerusalem, and the Arab people inside Israel. So they are arrested. Some of them they are arrested. Some of them are just lose their jobs because they post something in the social media platform. Between 2015 and 2018, Israel arrested over 500 Palestinians, according to this Palestinians Prisoners Studies Center, just for because they post something or because their opinion. In fact, the Israeli military employs military laws and orders, so they do not apply the civil law for Palestinian people to control online content and arrest Palestinians. So they apply the military laws and orders for Palestinians. The current situation in Gaza is actually, it's very sad and very dramatic there. And I will just give an overview about the list of ISPs there. I haven't actually a full list, but I try to find who work there. It seems this is the list of ISPs there, and mainly many of them actually use the Paltel Palestine Telecommunication Group as the gateway to the external world. So they use the Paltel. So Paltel is the major company that serve the other companies here. But in fact, Paltel also received a great damage. Actually, they suffer from a great damage in their infrastructure inside, and they cut the international routes outside. So to just see how the things happened from October 7, the infrastructure and the towers damage great. There was a great damage in telecommunication infrastructure. So only about 20% connecting there and operation there. Since October since October 7. After that, actually, it becomes worse and worse due to actually several reasons. One of them, destruction of towers, fiber optic network damages, infrastructure access, and it is not easy to go, even to maintain or to send the fuel for the towers. And because the electricity is already cut down there, cut off, they need to fuel the towers. So they are not easy to go there due to the massive destruction in the road. And some of the Paltel telecommunication group are killed when they try to do their job to provide the towers with the fuel. And they use actually three type of to feed the towers there, and with the electricity from direct company there, and also they use fuel and sun energy. Here another major company, ISP company. So this is 2021 of October. They completely fell out of offline. It's called the Speedy Click. In 2000, in October 27, completely the last remaining line completely disconnected. October 29, it's returned back, restored gradually, but with very limited coverage. Again, in November 1, they disconnected. Now, yesterday, they returned back to this disconnected. Here are a picture that show how the traffic goes down with the timeline. It's very important to keep the communication with the people there, even to communicate with between each other, because this saves the life for people. So here I just here a screenshot in Arabic with a message from a doctor called Dua Abu Shqair, and she's just sent a message to her friend to say that I am under robber, and please come to help me with her daughter. As we can see, the ongoing communication blackout in Gaza violated human rights and digital rights, I would say, because it is cutting people in Gaza from each other and from emergency assistance and from the world. Leave the international media in the dark, and actually Israel can do and commit more crimes there. So my recommendation and is to ask Israel to stop the unjustified massive surveillance in Palestinians, especially online, respect the freedom of speech and the privacy of Palestinians, and uphold legal responsibilities under the international law, and permit the Palestinians to build their own independent IC infrastructure. I hope I'm on time. So if you have any question, I'm ready to answer your question.
You've kept great time. Thank you for your presentation. I don't see anyone in the queue. That's not unusual. Oftentimes, presentations just are informational. And I've certainly been following this in the news, and you've given more details than are being covered. So just want to appreciate that. So it looks like we're going to move on to the next presentation, which is also online. So it'll be a bit of a transition moment while Tim comes online. Thank you so much, Ahmad.
Thank you.
Can we give a round of applause, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And Tim, you're here. And I know you don't have slides, so I wonder, I think, yeah, we can see you in the room. So whenever you're ready to begin, I'm just going to set a quick timer. You have 30 minutes. Hey, no worries. Get yourself organized.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim, and first of all, yeah, I want to thank for the presentation. That was really good and impressive, and yeah, I myself struggle a little bit transitioning now, because it touches upon so many questions that worry us. Let me maybe quickly point to a few things our office has done in relation to internet connectivity and human rights. I was obviously happy to see a reference right at the beginning. Last year, we published a comprehensive report on internet and communications shutdowns that highlights many of the aspects we just heard about, the relevance of connectivity for a huge host of human rights. Yeah, I encourage you to seek that one out. And then I will put it in the document number is in the chat. Okay. So let me now start with my own topic. I'm Tim Engelhardt, and I must say, when I got the invitation to speak here, I was excited both and also a little bit skeptical, because I feared that lots of you have been doing work in this area for a very long time in a very practical matter, and so I really want to add something of use to you. But I also was thinking, am I going to preach to the converted? But following many of the discussions on the mailing list, I can see how nuanced discussions are. And so I would like just to add our perspectives from our office sides, and really hope that I can hear from you a little bit about how you see things. Let me also note that what I'm going to talk about is not specifically limited to the work of the IETF, but rather the standard setting landscape more generally. So who am I? I said it already. I'm Tim Engelhardt. I work in the Geneva office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are the Human Rights Office of the United Nations, responsible for mainstreaming human rights across the system, advising states, calling out abuses and violations, etc. We've been working on issues on privacy, freedom of expression, internet shutdowns, disinformation, counterterrorism and technology, border technology for quite a few years now. Next year, we will publish a report on cyberbullying and also on the right to privacy and discrimination. And what I'm going to talk about today is based on a report we published earlier this year, which was mandated by the Human Rights Council, that is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, composed of up to 47 member states. And they had asked us to write a report on the human rights implications of standard setting, technical standard setting. So we presented this report in June, but we also plan to expand our work in this area, given that standards and the human rights dimension will only increase in importance in our view, and the downstream effects are just very, very relevant. So how are human rights relevant for technical standard setting? Firstly, they clearly have impacts. I just referred to the downstream effects. For example, many of you are acutely aware of it. The way standards define properties of technology determine how secure it is. They determine how encryption works, how far it will be implemented. That's relevant for privacy, for free expression, for liberty, for fair trial eventually, etc. Other standards define accessibility of digital products and services. At the same time, we understand that you can't always hard code human rights into a technical standard. There are so many layers to it, but you can still take them into account and really from the start look into how to integrate these aspects. So how can human rights thinking help? I have a very positive view of it, although I must admit in these days it sometimes feels hard to convey such a positive message. We speak here about, despite all the challenges, a fairly established framework. It has a binding nature on states and expanding expanding importance for businesses. This framework defines core values that we should consider in our lives, in what we put on markets, etc. The human rights treaties, with their rights, they help us to define what kinds of harms we need to look at when we look at the implications of technology. They provide us human rights frameworks that provide us defined and nuanced language and methodologies. There's a huge body of work on how to assess impacts, how to weigh the various positions that are at issue. Methodologies on human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessments are well established and increasingly well understood. In human rights, we can rely on an institutional framework and many institutions, national institutions, regional institutions, international institutions that interpret but also enforce. We have courts that can show us the interpretation of issues and how to address them. And under human rights law, we have defined duties and responsibilities. States, as participants in standard setting processes, for example at ITU, have still their human rights obligations. But also as regulators or lawmakers, where we see increasingly references in relevant laws to standard setting organizations that will define how technology will be rolled out. If that happens, the state can't just abduct their responsibilities and their duties. There is something still to, they have to ensure transparency, participation, accountability, etc. For businesses, we have the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And around that, a very well-developed ecosystem of experts, tools, organizations, etc. Our own office, we have a project that we call BTEC that works with a number of companies to really define more and more clearly how we apply the UN guiding principles in digital contexts. And standard setting organizations have their own duties and responsibilities. For example, ITU, where we can see it derived directly from state obligations, but also as from the fact that human rights are a pillar of the UN system. Standard setting organizations that act as businesses should comply with the guiding principles I just referenced. What challenges to implementing human rights in standard setting processes have we identified in our report? Again, this is a generalized view. As you're aware, the landscape of standard setting is so vast and varied that it can only be really a very rough overview. Firstly, we identified that human rights expertise is often lacking. It's in a way, it's a natural result of the technical focus of these organizations, and we don't think that that technical focus should be overburdened, but we can see that many aspects from social sciences, ethics, constitutional law, etc., are often really underrepresented. In many cases, we don't see any clear commitment to human rights responsibilities. No systematic conduct of human rights due diligence, no systematic monitoring of how the implementation of standards plays out in reality and how that affects people's rights. There's, of course, also some active resistance to including human rights considerations, for fear of complicating matters, for fear of politicizing matters, etc. But from the conversations we had, from what we see around the world, there's been progress, much more awareness. The fact alone that we have this group here together speaks to that. In our world, the UN world, for example, we can see that at ITU, 54 member states have called for a human rights-based approach to standard setting processes at ITU. And ITU recently has hired a human rights expert to take responsible for standard setting processes. So things are moving in an interesting and encouraging direction. Another gap we see is a gap of transparency. That's maybe really not the biggest problem we can see about IETF, which has always been at the forefront of being radically transparent. And participation gaps. The gender gap is the first that comes to mind. The standardization gap in terms of the global South representation is often dramatic. The problem of large companies in the end having a dominant presence that can lead to capture of issues. And of course, resources, lack of staff, lack of resources for traveling, for participating, etc., especially if, when it comes to civil society groups, contributes to a participation gap. Finally, I would also point to the geopolitical dimension. Over the last few years, we've seen that standard setting has become more and more of an arena for geopolitical fighting. I would also like to point to the dimension, broader trends we see currently when it comes to the discussions about internet governance more broadly, where we see increased pressure towards centralization and possible state control. So these are things I would like to add here too. So what to do about it? As you are all aware, there's no magic button. We can't simply switch a flick and things are better. But we see many entry points for standard setting organizations have a clear commitment to human rights as a responsibility, but also as a very useful framework for shaping responsible work. That includes systematically assessing the risks involved in their work and the impacts that we see. Have human rights screening mechanisms, monitor the real life impacts, and also have appeals mechanisms if things turn out problematic. We need, broadly speaking, much more access to information and inclusive participation. As I mentioned, IETF is a model in that regard, but we need generally documents being readily and freely available to the public. Programs to promote participation by a broader constituency, mentorship programs, fee waivers, codes of conduct that are actually being enforced, financial support, etc., would go a long way. And when it comes to the participants, there's a huge responsibility, especially on the powerful actors. I look in particular at businesses and their responsibilities under the guiding principles. And I would also like to point to states in the context of delegating powers to standard setting organizations. While it is understandable that complex technical issues cannot always be resolved in legislative processes themselves, we need to make sure that in the standard setting processes themselves, we have sufficient participation, sufficient democratic control, and sufficient respect for human rights. Otherwise, we undermine democratic governance of our digital world. I would leave it at that. As I said when I started, I would really like to hear from you how you see things, where you see main problems and solutions, and of course invite you to make any other comments you may have. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And I would just echo that. I think if folks have had a chance to read the report, if you've got questions, it would be really great to have a discussion, because I think what the report does is actually quite actionable. I mean, it's got literal recommendations for standards development organizations and how to take a more human rights approach in the development. And it's something we've been doing here for some years. So I know you all have views, and if you want to queue up, please do. If not, we can always take this to the list. Great. Stacy, are you in the room? Hey, Stacy.
Hi, it's a bit tall for me. Hello, Stacey Hoffman from the UK's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Hi, Tim. Nice to see you again. A quick question for you. You mentioned that you're going to be expanding your work in this area. I wondered if you could give us an idea of what OHCHR exactly is going to be looking to do. And then I also had a question for clarification. You thought that the work that you were talking about is most relevant to SDOs that act like businesses, but many SDOs don't act like businesses. Their standards are not for sale, they're openly available. So are they out of scope of the work that you're talking about? Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the question, and it's a useful clarification I can make. So firstly, on expanding our work, we plan to hire additional staff. Well, to be frank, one for the moment. It has been delayed for budgetary reasons, but should be done very soon. And then hopefully we can really do our work in a more sustained way. On your other question, that's more for well, our recommendations and our analysis applies to all standards developing organizations. I made the distinction, and you caught it well, simply for legal reasons. We believe that the human rights, for various reasons I gave, are relevant in all these contexts because we have the real life impacts. The guiding principles on business and human rights by definition apply to businesses, but not others. So you could make the distinction to say, well, there is no obligation and no responsibility on other forums where standards are being developed. But that would be, in my view, a rather legalistic distinction. But to be legally correct, I refer to businesses in my initial remarks. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So we have Nick in the queue who's online. So Nick, if you can come on camera, if you would be comfortable. If not, that's fine, but we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. Audio only. It's very, it's very early here. Thank you for the presentation. I maybe wanted to add a problem to your list of problems about forum shopping. That there is some danger that there's no particular path that standards need to follow, and there's lots of standards development organizations out there. I am quite concerned about the question of states advocating or delegating authority to less transparent bodies. And we see that a lot in the United States, where standards might be developed in a national standards body or an international standards body, where those standards aren't available to the public, even though they may be incorporated by reference to have the force of law. And so I'm just curious what we can do when standards might move into a less transparent body, or where there might be forum shopping between standards bodies. Could the UN provide some sort of baseline guidance on these are the expectations for a standards body to have a legitimate multi-stakeholder process such that it can be suitable for reference in some legal setting?
That's an excellent question. It's a problem, and that's huge in my opinion, and that's why I refer to it. I don't think that you can completely exclude it as a problem. Certainly not coming from the UN. We have limited power, and for understandable reasons, there would be quite a bit of opposition if we had outsized power to determine who could determine standards where. But your thought about baseline guidance is something that I find quite attractive and would go to the list of expanding work. In the report, we address some of the issues, but in a concise way. We have 8,500 words for these reports, but it would indeed be an important topic to take forward and see how we can support better integration of human rights, and better participation, better transparency when it comes to standard setting, especially if incentivized or even required by states.
Thanks, Tim. So David, you're next. And we'll, I guess, close the queue after this. So if you want to hop in, do that now. Go ahead.
Hi, David here. Am I audible? Yeah? Okay. So I've noticed tension between 2 points that you made. So I wanted to ask about it. The first was how there should be sufficient democratic participation in the standards making process. And And the other was the recent trend towards states to centralize or exert more control over technology and standards. And I was wondering if there's been any analysis on the, like an outcome-based analysis of when standards bodies do involve governments, what impact does it have on human rights? Is it helping human rights or hurting human rights? And that could be used as kind of guidelines for standards bodies to know how to engage with state actors, and but also balance that with human rights considerations.
I'm not aware of a specific analysis on comparison to what degree state participation has an impact on how the resulting standards affect human rights. That could be an interesting study. And I agree there's tension between the element of participation and state control. I see it as a reflection of where things go in real life, where we have these kind of struggles, and where we have all kinds of states, some with better, some with terrible human rights track records, where the rule of law and democratic governance can be strong or very weak. We have to deal with both, and that's stronger, broader participation, especially in more state-focused processes, is one way to balance things out, but certainly not a miracle cure when there are problematic pushes towards solutions and standards that could be problematic for human rights. So to summarize, I agree there's tension, and an in-depth study on outcomes of standard setting processes where states have a particular role to play would be useful to have. We don't have it at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Ali, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ali Rezaki. I just want to ask, how can we make things more concrete for protocol designers and our, let's say, products, services? What I would like to emphasize is sometimes these topics become nice to have. How can we turn them into requirements? And in some projects, we are following a concept called key values and key value indicators. We even start from UN SDGs and try to develop those into technology enablers and try to track if our designs and services make an impact to those. Do you think such an approach would work to make things more concrete in terms of how to, let's say, carry human rights considerations into design and implementation? Thank you.
Yeah, so Tim, we're going to take another question that's related. We'll take them together. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Mallory. Hi, team. This is Carolina Cairo. It's good to see you again. Yeah, I guess I had a follow-up question that relates to the previous question. I don't know if you can see us, team, but you have quite a packed room here of IETFers present. So I was wondering whether there's a specific ask of this community. I heard in your remarks you spoke about sort of examples from ITUT as a standardization space. Do you have any specific asks of IETF as a space, and have you developed any recommendations that are SDO specific? Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, my view for the moment was a more generalized one. And in many ways, what IETF has done, what the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Group has done is, I wouldn't say without flaw, but certainly inspiring and something to build on. So I'm hesitant to come from my perspective and say you have to do these and things as I think you should do them. On the practical level, we have many people in the room. You included, Melody included, others, Nick, and many people I simply don't know, who I believe have very good ideas and lots of experience in this space. What I would say more broadly is it would be great if the work on human rights that's being done here could be more full-heartedly endorsed across the community and more full-heartedly implemented. But that's a matter for the community, and that's a matter that can't be imposed by anyone, but that needs to be done by the people on the ground. So that would be my initial reaction to that. To wrap this up, I would have loved to be there in person. We simply don't have the time and capacity at the moment, at this time of the year, to have more in-depth discussions of that, to have more direct interactions and work things out.
Great. Colin, you're the last one in the queue.
Thank you. Is this working? Yep. Okay, so hi, Colin Perkins, speaking as an individual. Thank you. I think this was a really interesting talk. I think the points you've raised are really important, and especially about how to operationalize some of the discussions and make them actually have these issues considered during the design of protocols is something which is really critical. Not so much a question, but a comment. I was really interested in the recommendations for monitoring the impact of standards, this is something that's challenging for many SDOs. I know the IETF, for example, doesn't have the resources or the ability to do such monitoring once the standards have been published, although I'm sure some of the companies that are deploying the standards clearly do so. I think it would be an interesting topic for the IETF and SDOs in general to think about how we can begin to close that loop and what data is available to try and get some insights into how the standards are used and what impact they're having and whether we can then bring them back for future revisions and so on. So something for us to think about going forward, I think. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. And I wanted to relatedly call out in the chat, this does link to ongoing work we have in this research group on the draft guidelines. I think it's actually speaks to the last few comments, that is sort of derivative work or an extension of the work of 8280, the one draft I mentioned earlier in the introduction. All right, so we're going to transition now. I'm going to invite Stephanie up to give our final talk. Thank you very much, Tim. Can we give him a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
And if you haven't read the report, really, really do. I think it's very instructive. I know I know folks here participate in more than just the IETF, and it does have a broader application to other SDOs where you may be involved and you may see some of these conversations crop up, just like we've been having an HRPC, but in the context of other SDOs. And so you can be a bridge to those and help sensitize the issue. Okay, so Stephanie, you're going to speak here at the X, and I'm going to pull up your slides.
Okay, so I apologize for the overly colorful slides. I was told this is not something that is usual here, so apologies for that. I'm with United Nations Population Fund, or UNFPA. Do not try and match the acronym with the name because it doesn't work. This is a UN agency for reproductive and sexual health, and a large piece of our mandate is gender-based violence. I specifically sit on the gender-based violence team at HQ, and I work at the intersection of gender-based violence and technology. One acronym, or actually I'm going to give you two more acronyms to learn for today. One being gender-based violence, or GBV, and the other being technology facilitated gender-based violence, TFGBV. I say that because those are very long names and I will refer to them quite a bit in this presentation. So I will be providing, sharing the guidance that we wrote. But first I want us to briefly look at this terminology that I just mentioned, technology facilitated gender-based violence. If you want to know more about this, please go ahead and grab this link. The slides are also shared on Data Tracker, so you can also check it out there. This is a report that we produced in 2021, looking at what does this terminology mean, what does it include, what does it not, what type of profiles are people that we're looking at that are being targeted by this, as well as what type of profiles are there that are the perpetrators of this type of harm. Next slide. To say there are a lot. There are a lot of things that are included within this. This is not meant to be read in detail, but it includes image-based abuse, sextortion, hacking, cyberstalking, doxing, which is one of the bigger concerns that I have, deep fakes. These are the types of things that we're talking about when we're talking about TFGBV. So those are, we're not going to go in the detail of that, but it's something to understand before I dive into the guidance that we wrote here. This is the guidance on safe and ethical, how to create safe and ethical technology, specifically for GBV programming. So as I said, I sit in the GBV space. So we want technology in our space. We want to come up with cool tools that will help us do our job better. But we also need to recognize that we, as implementers, are collecting a massive amount of sensitive data. We're collecting survivor personally identifiable information, and there are databases that have all of these lists. This is highly concerning for all of us. Like I said, we're also the Reproductive and Sexual Health Agency, so we're also collecting a lot of women's health data. Again, highly concerning when we're bringing in technology. So this guidance is a path for us to move forward at this intersection. Quickly, the objectives of this are, one, what are the benefits that technology can bring, but also what are the risks, harms, and misuse that it can bring. This is meant as a framework for standards and oversight moving forward, and also digital interventions process more generally. So to give you an idea of where this came from, we looked at the data privacy and data ethics best practices and standards. We looked at WHO research ethics because a lot of this is at the intersection of health, as I mentioned. And then we also have a massive amount of gender-based violence or GBV guidance. So we look at both the humanitarian side as well as the development and the developed situation, because we are in, which I did not mention, in over 150 countries globally. We work in emergency contexts as well as in developed settings. And then we also looked at the digital health space, because this is a space that is used to working with sensitive data and has set out some guidance in this space. But as we all know, the gender aspect is something that's not considered as much as we would like. So to give you an overview, something I didn't mention is that the version that we have here is actually an implementation summary. So it's a short 20-pager. sorry, we say short. UN, of course, we're used to long documents and long guidance. The full version will actually be 80 pages long. So this is the table of contents for the longer forthcoming version. The idea behind this is that we can have it be a useful tool, not only for GBV providers, but also for you all, for anybody who wants to work at this intersection, because as you know, the gap is wide. As you might assume, most of the conversations and talks that I have are with a room full of women. So you can see that, here, of course, as we know, it's quite the opposite. And we know that there's a gender divide. We know that there's a technical gap, right? We bring a lot of different aspects, different layers of the human, of the security aspects for women in particular. But we also don't bring a lot of the technical pieces, hence why I'm here to hopefully be a bridge. So anyway, this guidance is meant for everybody. So some things might seem very obvious to you and others might not at all. It might be the first time you hear things. So that's why we have we have the terminologies, we have core principles focused on GBV as well as data. We also look at current technologies. This is extremely basic, but it's just to get everybody on the same page. We will not go over that today, so don't worry. We have benefits, risks, and then steps, promising practices, and then annexes. Annexes are great to create tools that you can actually use and implement today. So these are the actual pieces. The purple or highlighted versions are what's in the summary, but all of them will be included in the full version. Okay, so let's get to it. The main principles are the backbone of what this guidance is set on. The ones here to the right will probably be pretty familiar, whether you agree or not. A lot of them are data-specific principles. So we have well, maybe the first you may not know, safety by design. Of course, similar to privacy by design or security by design, it's thinking about safety from the beginning. This term was coined by the eSafety Commission in Australia. So if you are interested in looking into how they're implementing that, that's where this terminology really was coming from. But yeah, the idea is thinking about safety as from the beginning rather than as an afterthought. Purpose limitation, so making sure that we have the scope of the technology that has a clear purpose and is not kind of ever expanding, specifically when we're dealing with sensitive data. Data minimization, of course, the only way to really be safe and protect data is to not have it at all. So we want to make sure that the data that we're collecting is only the essential data as we move forward in the technology. Proper use of the data. So ethically, gender-based violence guidelines require that you do not collect data unless you have a clear purpose for it. So that is something that we would like to be considered before we create it. Fairness, I think we all probably agree with that one. I won't go into that. Informed consent, transparency, and ownership. This one is repeated here because it is so important. When we're talking about consent, we're not talking about a checkbox consent, legal obligations. We're talking about making sure that the survivor or the person whose data is being collected understands what data is being collected on them, how it is being stored, where it's going, what type of risks are involved with their data being collected. And so the idea here is that we get a bit more creative with how we have consent. I think one thing that I've seen recently with the concept of ongoing consent is I actually got a notification from Google Photos, and it said, hey, you've been sharing your photos with us for 6 months. Would you like to continue this, or would you like to stop this process? So I thought that was a great example of continuous consent. Right, it's a simple solution, but if we're not thinking about it, then we're not going to be including that. So that's really about our consent, transparency, and then ownership we have in here to kind of start to think and shift our mind around who is the owner of the data that we're collecting. Is it the user? Is it the company? Let's start to kind of think about that, especially when we're talking about highly sensitive data. Data accuracy and quality of data. I won't go into that because I think we all understand that quite well. Security, you all are way more experts on data security than I am, so I will not go into that. Accountability, and then we are unconditional service because we are a UN agency. So that is the data specific principles. For the core kind of GBV principles, our number one is always do no harm. So that means having a risk benefit analysis beforehand and knowing that sometimes doing something is more harmful than doing nothing. So knowing when to move forward with a project and when to say, no, we need to stop this project. It's just something that we do on a regular basis with our programming, technology aside. So it's something that we would really like to use and that we will be implementing going forward in our space. Survivor-centered. So this is very similar to human-centered design, but it's looking specifically at the gender-based violence survivor. It means let's not assume what people are going through. Let's not assume what is safe for a person or what is not safe for a person. We need to do more research on that and think about options that a survivor might need in any given situation. So providing those options, because we know that survivors often do not report acts of violence, and they don't do that because sometimes it is unsafe for them to do that. So we need to recognize that sometimes that the solution is not always through the justice system. That's really the bottom line behind survivor-centered. Informed consent and transparency, I think I went into that. Again, it's repeated because it is just so important in this intersection. Participatory. So this is also somewhat in the human-centered design space, but it's really about designing with people, bringing them into the problem, not coming in and having a solution and dropping it in, but involving from the point of ideation, having people who you are intended to be supporting incorporated throughout the entire process. Again, not a checkbox, not one-off focus group, but incorporated through the design all the way to monitoring safety aspects through the end. Very difficult, easy for me to come up here and say, but as we know, this is actually very difficult and will take time for us to figure out how to do that in the best way. We have come up with some ideas, but this is not me coming up here giving a solution. Also rights-based and then advancing gender equality, which again in this audience I think are pretty obvious. Okay, so this is to say, this is part of the, what are the things that technology can bring? We've got increased gender equality and closing the gender digital divide. Technology can increase access to information and services. In particular, this was the case during COVID. A lot of the gender-based violence or GBV work went online because we couldn't access a lot of the population. Amplifying positive social norms via social media, facilitating delivery and improving quality of services. I think also there's a benefit of increasing our future ability to create better tech for GBV. Combating technology-facilitated gender-based violence. This issue is very complex, as we know, and we think that there are technologies that can support actually combating TF-GBV. And my favorite is facilitating research and increasing robust evidence findings and insights. No, it's not popular, but that one is my favorite. Next slide.
I think I'm offline. I can't progress the slides right now, but I'm going to get back. I'm going to tether myself and get back on. I don't know if other people are having network issues, but anyway. Sorry. Do you want to see locally?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
I always wonder if this is a coincidence. No worries.
Just to confirm, are others online still?
Yeah.
Okay. Must be me then. Weird. I've got Wi-Fi, or I've got a mobile connection. So.
So I do have, even though the slide's not here, I will continue. The next slide was very similar to the positives, and it's the negative aspects of what poorly designed technology can do. We have, of course, this can increase gender inequality, increase offline gender-based violence as well. It can increase technology-facilitated gender-based violence, as we can assume. And then also we have all of the non-gendered abuse that can come as risks as well. Yeah, there we go. No worries. Yeah, so anyway, these are a lot of the issues that we also need to think about going forward. You can actually switch to the next one. Okay, so the guidance really is meant as a tool for us to kind of start shifting our mind in how we think about this problem. This is a socioeconomic model that we use a lot in the gender-based violence space. We think about the risks that any program has to an individual, to a community, and as well as to society. So this is an idea of what this would look like at the intersection. I mean, we of course have the risk to survivors, but we also have the risk to responders and advocates. Myself being here, I understand, is a risk because there are people that do not believe that we should have equality and could then come after me. Anyway, the results that we really are concerned about is death. We see that especially in more conservative environments, women not being pictured without being covered has resulted in death. So something that we may assume as, okay, it's just an image of a woman, you know, in certain contexts, that same exact image can and have meant death. So these are some real concerns that we have. Increased gender-based violence generally, backlash within the home or within the society, as well as tech-facilitated GBV. The others, I think you can assume as organization, as a community, there can be decreased confidence within the technology itself, as well as the organization if things go south. And then, of course, there are broader societal impacts as well that can amplify gender inequality if we're not considering it. So this is also meant for us to kind of look at a different threat actor mapping. We are very used to and familiar with financially motivated hackers, opportunists, but some other groupings of threat actors that we might not be considering as much are the perpetrators themselves. I think, thank you so much for looking at intimate partner violence. That's a huge issue and is something that we don't consider enough at this intersection. That includes family members, strangers, friends, acquaintances. So I think we're starting to cover that aspect a bit. But to other groups, you know, I think we also have governments, which generally, of course, at this intersection of human rights, we are thinking about how governments can come in and be the threat. But I think something that might be missing is our governments that are specifically wanting to target empowered women. That might be an aspect that we might not be considering when we're building out our security systems. And the other one, the other big elephant in the room, are misogynistic individuals and groups. So people that actively hate and want to harm women and will seek it out is another huge concern that I think that we're not considering enough within this intersection. This is one that I like to show to the GBV community. I think you all know this probably quite well, but whether or not you are coming in with, whether or not one is coming in with malicious intent or whether or not it's accidental or negligence, the result can be the same. When you're not properly managing, storing, sharing data, of course, that can then be intercepted and taken by bad actors. So yeah, it's something that we just like to highlight, that even the best intended individuals or groups can can result in the same amount of harm. Okay, so we know that there's always a balance that has to be had. We like to point to this three-legged stool of safety, security, and privacy. We really do not encourage the either or discussions. I think it is something that we need to look at all three when we're at this intersection, and this is just something to highlight that. So, what do we do about it? In the guidance, we have 17 different steps. Again, this is meant for people who are creating technology for GBV programming specifically. But I do think that there are certain aspects that can be pulled out of this and set more into the standard space. Overall, we have a number of considerations. So again, the do no harm. We've got user integration or participatory. Again, that is not a one-off. It is throughout a number of the steps, which is outlined in the guidance. Use and accessibility, safeguarding, managing risk, data analysis, and consent. So here we have kind of who does what step, right? That's also something that can be complicated, right? Like how exactly do we work together? We've started to try to figure this out. We have, forgive me for oversimplifying IT, but we have GBV marked out and IT. This is something that we understand will be revised later, but the idea is where we can kind of work together. I think the gender-based violence space can be working a lot on the beginning phases, and then having more of a combination within our ideation, prototyping, budget, consent check, and then having more of a joint process all the way through the end. So again, you can find these detailed in our longer version, but we have this list again in the short version as well. So what are some of these promising practices? As I mentioned, we have safety by design, but we also want to consider privacy by design and security by design principles. We want to understand and design for the context of the user's actual needs. So again, try not to make too many assumptions. Try to include throughout the process so that we actually understand what is needed. Adopt human-centered and participatory approaches, data analysis and use. We want the research to be backed by evidence and research-based approaches. So actually do the research and not just, again, with those assumptions. Test and learn with users, have informed consent baked in from the beginning, monitor and evaluate, especially the safety concerns. I think that's something that isn't really integrated as much as we would like. Sustainability, think about the product beyond product launch, which I know you all think about, and alignment of all of what we do with the gender-based violence national and global standards, because there are a lot of them. Our space has been around for decades, and we have a lot of research and standards that we follow that I think aren't as understood or aware within the broader community, and we're happy to share that as we go forward at this intersection. And also, I think as we all understand, a lot of this is going to be about being interdisciplinary, so bringing people together. And again, I know this isn't easy. It's really hard. People working together is really hard and it takes time, but I think at this intersection in particular, it's life-threatening. The annexes are diving a bit more deep into exactly the how-tos. We have a risk-benefit analysis tool that we go through, exactly a full list of what those might be. We have GBV digital essentials, so very simple, high-level do's and don'ts, and then a checklist that is fully throughout. It's basically a summary of the guidance in checkbox method. And then we also have kind of in-house versus cloud, the pros and cons when setting up a tool. what to consider in a partnership, how do we select the right vendor going forward, and then as well as contingency planning. That is very specific to a humanitarian setting. I'll give you a quick example that, we have services in countries where the government has collapsed unexpectedly, and then they were targeting women and girls specifically for rape and murder. So when that happens, we need to be able to have a contingency plan of what we do with that technology so that they cannot access the list of people that they would like to target. And then a data mapping workshop, which is more for people that don't understand data as much, to get them to really think about what it means and what the risks are. And then myths, facts, and frequently asked questions. And that's it. So I don't know, we have maybe a minute or two for questions.
We have plenty of time for questions.
Oh,
You are perfectly on time. I really appreciate you coming to present this. So we can leave the queue open for just a beat while folks consider coming to the mic. Bob, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Bob Hinden. So this is all very interesting and important work, but I'm sort of at a loss to understand where the overlap is with the IETF, because many of the things you talk about, while very important issues, are not things, at least as far as I can tell, the IETF has really any involvement in. So can you provide any guidance for things that are done here that we could be looking at?
Yeah, thank you. I think the idea at this point, as I mentioned, is we're still very high level. Part of the interdisciplinary process is to include you all from the beginning or from this midpoint. I think that there are some aspects that can be included throughout throughout the process. When we look at the principles slide, for example, how are we looking at consent throughout our technology? How are we looking at transparency? Those are pieces that can, I think, be included, more immediately if there is the will for that. But yeah, like I said, we're also working on it. I see us more having more conversations as we move forward.
And I could
Right,
maybe
but-
respond if you wouldn't, just because we have work in the research group that is about intimate partner violence. There's an adopted research group draft. I've linked to it in the chat, but the high level points, you can go and read it, is, well, we're about to get into it, but I would say I'm not going to go into what the draft says. The way the draft started was there was also a similar effort to try to document censorship techniques using internet protocols. And so folks were thinking, what if we took all of the poorly named apps like spouseware or stalking apps, right? And broke them down and looked at how they function, because some of them exploit, in particular, internet protocols using local networks, and try to elucidate for protocol designers how, if you consider local access to one's device, and the endpoint I know is a sort of contentious place to talk in the IETF, you might actually learn a bit about folks' threat models, right? And so I think we've tried to document that, and that's sort of where it started, but we're certainly having an ongoing conversation about it. And while there's not complete overlap with the things that Stephanie is talking about, it can be helpful, I think, for implementers as well when they take, IETF designed standards and then actually try to build end user facing software.
Right. I get that at one level, but at the other level, the IETF does protocol specifications. We don't build implementations. We're not so for this work to be useful here, I think there's going to have to be some more specific points to things that do happen here that we have control over that would help. Because otherwise, I could see it, adding considerations to every RFC would perhaps be a lot of work, or there'd be a lot of not actable
Totally.
here. So we need to be careful.
Oh no, absolutely agree with you, and that's the effort of this accompanying draft. If you want, so we do have a queue. Were you able to get in with the Meet Echo? Okay,
So he's first.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, there was a weird usability issue with the Meet Echo. I had to re-log in order to get the raise hand button. So thanks for this presentation. I really appreciate it. There were a couple things that I noticed here that I wanted to call out. One is that you said at one point that you didn't feel qualified to speak to us about security or protocols and stuff like that. And I would actually like to kind of encourage you not to think that way, because one of the problems that I frequently see in the IETF is people are very knowledgeable about the technical details of encryption, and even sort of how encryption works and how it can be used, but they are not really seriously considering threat models. And that's something that, whether your knowledge of encryption is strong or not, your knowledge of threat models, I think, is very strong. And that's an important contribution. It's very important. So don't hold back on that. And I'm sure there are other things like that are worth considering. Like don't think that just because we're all a bunch of technical geeks here and we know what we're talking about on subjects that you don't, that you should be silent. Even if you're confused, it's important to clear up that confusion rather than just assuming that we know what we're doing, because in my experience, often we don't on that level. So that's one thing. The other thing I noticed is I didn't see any discussion about the weaponization of freedom of speech in this summary, and I think that's kind of an important topic. I don't know if it needs to be in this analysis, but I just was curious, because there's this problem that freedom of speech is very important, but it's also easily weaponized, and how do we address that? So I was just curious if that's something that you guys considered and decided was out of scope.
Yeah. First, thank you for all that you said. It is really helpful. I mean, we're here to work together and to figure out how to move forward. On the freedom of expression, we are involved in that space. It's not something that we specifically considered for this guidance, but we've worked with the special rapporteur on freedom of expression, inputted into that, helped her present that. So we are definitely involved in that space, but it is a bit separate to this work. But that's a really good point that you bring up. As we roll out the longer version, that's something that we can definitely consider and integrate throughout. So thank you.
The reason I brought it up is actually because I feel like a lot of stuff that is relevant to what you're doing actually is, like, the way that we design the protocols that are currently in place is creating problems, and so we really need to think about it. But I don't want to belabor that point. I had one other point, but I'll just let someone else talk. Thank you.
We can talk after.
Well, there are two ahead of me in your online queue potentially. Do you want
I'm
to
not
wait?
sure when you got in the queue, but if you want to go at the end, that's fine. Or you could go now.
Okay. George Michelson, APNIC, I just wanted to say thank you for presenting. I think, are you familiar with the idea we talk about here often of a tussle, the kind of a disagreement, tension between two parties in a conversation? It happens a lot here. And we have a tussle that has gone on for a very long time about tension between privacy and identity. So a lot of the attack risks, a lot of the threat risks online that you talked about include multiple identity actions, doxing, and sort of swatting and swarming behaviors. And that drives to the belief people's true identity should be an aspect of how they work online. But there are many, many good arguments for why privacy is innately important. And some people need full privacy or pseudonymy online. And it's an irreconcilable tension. I think we're probably going to be having a difficult conversation about these things. Somewhat to Bob's comments, protocols we develop have to sometimes carry identity, but they very rarely carry any structural intent that says whether it is a pseudonymous identity or a real identity. We don't kind of go into that space. But if you go into the ops related areas, particularly the dialogue with law enforcement, you're probably coming a lot closer to that dialogue. I don't know what the answer is. I think this is a horrific problem. It worries me that it's simply going to be a bigger problem. So thank you for taking a burden to do work in this space.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's something that we still are having conversations internally about. you know, of course, we don't want things to be happening in the dark, but we also recognize that there are a lot of people that want to surveil, you know, activists and survivors. So yeah, it's a conversation that we need to have more of.
Nick, you're next.
Hi, Nick Doty, Center for Democracy and Technology. Thank you for the wide-ranging presentation. I think we have a lot to learn. One area in particular that I've been thinking about, and maybe we could learn from your expertise here, is on the participatory design. That as the IETF is doing more work that is more directly focused, or where we're trying to consider gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, I think we don't know as well how to effectively include participation from the most affected people in these spaces. And I think there may be some things we can do in terms of liaison or like some ways of translating. But as we do work in public, and I want us to do work in public, I also want us to understand how we can like actually get expertise from people who are affected without necessarily involving them directly in public discussion. So just if you have any pointers, or if you can sort of keep helping us understand how we can get participation when we get into these very technical discussions at the protocol layer. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing up that point. I think specifically engaging survivors in a safe and ethical way. That's really our space. There are a lot of different standards and best practices on how to do that properly. I think there are some, you know, that we use to build out this guidance, but I'm also happy to share them on the side. Yes, please do not go to your local hotline. Do not find your known survivor that you know of and talk to them about these issues. That's not what we mean by participatory. That's not what we mean by including them. We know that 1 in 3 women have been survivors of sexual violence in their lifetime. So you can assume that if you get a group of women and you talk generally about a topic, that they will have something to say about it. You need to do that, of course, in confidentiality. There are a number of ethical guidelines that speak specifically to this. Again, we're here, we're happy to support in this process, but yes, involving local community service organizations and NGOs to help you through that process is number one, the recommendation that I would give. But yes, I can also share guidance as well, and as well as including more of a participatory process even outside of the gender-based violence space.
Yeah, Arnaud, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Arnaud Tadei from Broadcom. So first, thank you very much for this presentation. I found it very relevant to this work. I agree that here we are here to do protocols, but as previous speakers said, people are very strong on one aspect of security, which is encryption, but not on the overall part of security. I think your slides 13, 14, and 15 are particularly relevant. The one on the triad between safety, security, and privacy, this is not the first time I see this slide. I think I saw it 2 years ago somewhere else. I think this is, in physics, that's a 3-body problem. That means on a 2-body problem, you can do an equation, but not on a 3-body problem. So 3-star systems are unpredictable. My view on it is like it's worse than that. It's probably like a quantum state. There are 3 elements that are in states that superpose each other. Privacy hates security for good reasons. It has to, is going to hate it because it has to leak something to a third party it cannot trust. I agree with that. But at the same time, privacy without security is not privacy. So that's exactly a new cat of Schrödinger problem. So I think that what I really like in your approach is that you are not taking one aspect, which I usually see here, which I really appreciate, because I don't think we can do just one side here. You have a real safety issue, which is another complication. So I would really encourage you to continue on that line and inform us what you learn and discover there, because we need to rebalance here a couple of parties and heal them. Stop the zealotism of privacy versus security versus safety, because this is going nowhere, and we are going to damage simply what we are doing by not even being informed correctly. Last piece is on the slide 13. That's just a naive question from my side. So this is a Venn diagram that is very interesting to me. I don't know how you build it, how you had to check all intersections of is this intersecting or not, or but would be happy to learn the cooking of this one. I find it very good. Yeah, thank you very much. Keep coming and keep forcing us to think.
Thank you so much.
Last of the queue is Ali.
Hi, thanks very much. There's quite a few who think that technology perpetuates or even makes it worse for inequalities in society. And because strong and powerful use technology to their advantage and things linger on. This looks like a good example of that, what you have been telling us. But to change that, do you have, from your broad knowledge from the UN and all the social sciences, I'm hoping, do you have any, let's say, guidance or input or examples you can share with us so that we can take it to the technical level? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we do, and we're actively looking for more of those examples that can be shared. The gbvims.com, if you would like to look at that is a tool that was developed across a number of UN agencies, specifically for gender-based violence data tracking. And it's a tool that we see as really the gold standard in this space. It took 15 years to develop and is currently being monitored. We are the ones that are housing that. That would be my first number one recommendation, to look at that. And then we are also actively, as we speak, looking at all of our countries globally to find some more great examples that we're able to provide.
Thanks. So, I mean, exactly, we have to link the technology side with the basically whatever the problems in society are and turn it into a co-design. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll add too that if you go back in the history of HRPC sessions, we had a while back Lana Ramjet from Cornell, who runs a center for technology-based violence where victims come as a helpline. So help desks and helplines are really expanding as a best practice model for how to get support to victims directly. Like they're trying to stay anonymous online, or they're on the run, or they have an issue, or they're worried their phone is being spied on, things like that. Those practitioners and those centers, increasingly they're becoming embedded within, domestic violence shelters and other kinds of services. They're also fantastic intermediaries to learn from, because they can sort of, and similar exactly to the work you're doing, right? They have a broader view of the trends and things like that. So we've had speech talks in the past about similar things that are a little bit more concrete in terms of how you actually serve end users and what you can learn from the way they're using it or the way it's being used against them.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to distill from that the information, we need to collect it in a data format or something that can be fed into the protocol design and research.
Yep, it's great. It's such a great segue to the next topic, which is the draft on this. But let's first thank Stephanie for coming all this way to speak to us about this. Awesome. Yeah, really, really big thanks to all of our speakers. Just want to always appreciate the folks who take the time to put together presentations and to entertain questions. So I'm going back to my welcome slides so that I can remember Our last piece of agenda is on this draft on intimate partner violence considerations. And I'm just checking if Sophia's online. All right, so she's not. So Sophia is the main author of this draft. I'm also a co-author, and I don't have slides about it. But I wonder if you could raise your hand if you've read this draft, even if it's just been today while we're talking. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you to the people who have. Not very many of you have. Yeah, I can go through the high points again, sorry, without slides. But we started from the perspective of, can we understand how some of the technology uses are actually either abusing or leveraging internet protocols, and to try to document that. But first, because the IETF is not a space where there's a lot of sort of explicit or tacit understanding of these issues, we do spend a bit of time in an introduction, in a definition section, terminology, to talk about what are some of these things. So it's very similar to what Stephanie's just presented to us. It goes into a categorization of different kinds of technology-based intimate partner violence attacks. The first category is around when I like to think it's the attacker you know. So it's someone who potentially has access to your devices, your routers. That's got a lot of considerations, I think, that we don't often include in our threat models. Then it's the tech-based intimate partner violence tactics. So these are software-based tools. These are, location trackers, things like that. We have a bunch of things that don't fall into either of those two categories, and then we talk more about the methods and the tactics, actually, of the intimate partner violence attacks. So, and then we have recommendations. So I think it's worth going through if you haven't yet. We have only just adopted it. It's really only in its third revision. It's absolutely certainly up for conversation. We'd be particularly interested in ways to do exactly what Bob and others have come to the mic to say, which is, please, let's make this as specific to the IETF as possible. We don't want to just put this out there to have it general. We really do want to target it to the work that we're doing here. So yeah, if you could keep that in mind, we're welcoming reviews. And I don't have a lot of next steps in terms of the draft, other than I think more people obviously need to read it and engage with the content. And so please do that. But I would take anybody at the mic if you have questions, or you want to talk this through, or you have read it and you want to make some suggestions. Okay, fair enough. I will just say one last thing, which is that at this stage, I mean, now this conversation is being had in a lot of different places. There's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of awareness about it. Many years ago, 2 jobs ago, I was working at the Association for Progressive Communications, circa 2006, although I didn't join that organization until 2012. APC were going to the Commission on the Status of the Women, which is a UN body, and talking about how technology could potentially lead to harm. And in 2006, if you can remember, people were much more optimistic about technology, and it was unheard of to say that it wouldn't be an enabler of all the good things ever. And so it took many, many, many years, in fact, more than 10, to actually even get a statement out of the Commission on the Status of Women that talked about technology-enabled violence. I think that was 2016. So it took a long time to get this conversation going, but now that it's taken off, we have a lot of folks, a lot of experts in a lot of different domains who are talking about this, and I think it's really great that we can talk about it at the IETF too. Yes. Yeah, please do. Yeah, that'd be awesome. You're okay. Go ahead.
Okay, because you have not heard my voice enough, I'm going to to comment on this. Yeah, because I have read the draft, and yeah, I just want to say it's great. I'm loving how it does get into specifics of what we can do about the issue. But there were some things that that I saw that we might want to also consider. One being the survival profile of the one that I had mentioned previously about an image of a woman, for example, and not having been covered. You know, how we have seen that this has resulted in femicide, where women have been murdered. So we might want to kind of consider that as one of the other issues as we have this paper. I think also, yeah, just in general to think about the result as death. I think we've seen in, you know, in the writing that of course we know about the emotional controlling aspects, but also to consider that death is also an outcome of this. Also, I didn't see much on like livelihood and job loss, which I think is something else that happens a lot as well. As far as like means of attack go, one piece that we see is very common is that children being used to get access to a mother. So putting a device on a child, within a child's toy, within their jacket lining, so that they're then able to track the intimate partner. And then of course, like the intersection of IoT controlling devices, of course, that there's a huge intersection there as well. And that's it. Those were just kind of more comments than questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. We'll capture those in the notes, and we'll file issues that they've all been really, really great. Try to figure out where we can work them in. All right. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I do want to just at least touch on the rest of we don't have any other business. I didn't even ask for an agenda review at the beginning. I apologize. If you have things, you can come to the mic. But just two really quick updates. Draft association the status was in IRTF chair review. That review's been complete. It's been sent to the list. Some of you may have seen that. At the moment, it's a research group draft. It passed last call from our research group, went to the IRTF chair. It's now back in the research group with suggested changes from Colin, and actually 2 paths forwards. And I've highlighted those for you on the list. The 2 paths are, let's publish what we have with some, slight tweaks, but as a more of an essay rather than characterizing it as research, or we remain dedicated to the research portion of this exercise, but then we need to up the methodology and sort of revisit some of or either make more explicit the methodology or re-up some of those methods and improve the research itself. Those are the 2 paths. I've not had any response to that question because I want the research group to weigh in what you want to do, which path you want to take. And I'm going to have to add a third one now in this meeting while we're all together. I can take this also to the list. Who wants to work on this? It's a research group draft. It's got some authors. Those authors aren't active. I'm one of them, but it's really been more of a doc shepherd role. Also, Nick has been a helpful actual logistical doc shepherd because I'm a chair. So, we need to understand the willingness of the research group to continue working on this document and to take it forward. And if we have to wait for that enthusiasm to show up, we can wait. And I'm not seeing anyone jump to the mic. You might not want to jump to the mic right now. We can talk about this on the list. Ram is here. Thank you, Ram.
Hi, Ram from Michigan. So reading the draft for the association seems important. It seems like an important topic to consider. I think 2 things that I would like to see more of in the draft. I think it's briefly mentioned, but one thing is the impact of self-censorship on association, not the direct form of blocking or some amount of restrictions, but more of how users are implicitly prevented from associating together online. And the other thing is the impact of local platforms. platforms, because that would also be important to study. As I understand it, the draft, at least now the examples that were presented there, looks at very high scale blocking of popular platforms, but that does not really mean that people aren't meeting or communicating together, maybe on local platforms. So that would also be, I think, an area of interest. Yeah, and in general, I think I'm pretty interested in this, contributing to it, but yeah, I'd like to see if others are as well. Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ram. So also, Nick, you're on, and as Draft Association Doc Shepherd, really keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, for the review and suggestions. I wasn't sure if the suggestion to make it an essay would suggest that it wasn't research. Maybe this is a question about sort of different research methodologies, but it seemed like one potential way forward is to say, this is a review of some illustrative cases on these topics that the research group has done, these authors have done. And here's a presentation of some thoughts about that are directed at this research question. I wonder if that would address Colin's concern that this isn't in some ways an exhaustive review or covers all examples, but would still be, it would still be addressing a research question.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I mean, this is clearly addressing a research question. I think where I had concerns is that the way it was phrased was that it suggested, some of the phrasing suggested a more systematic approach than was actually taken. So if we can rephrase it to, highlight the approach which was taken and the limits of the surveys and so on, to avoid overclaiming, then this is what I'm trying to get at in the comments. Or we can make it much more systematic. And yes, I mean, I think this will need some detailed thinking about exactly how to phrase that and how to do it. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly a way forward if we can figure out exactly how to phrase it.
Can I keep you there at the mic just for a second? Because I have been grappling with this a little bit myself, having only recently come in as an author, because Stefan was doing a lot of the literature review and the research design, and then it led into the case studies, because we actually used to call them case studies and now we just call them examples, I think. So one of the questions I had in your review, and maybe others will remember this better than me, is it an issue of just better documenting what the methodologies were, or is it a problem with the methodology itself?
I think some of the phrasing suggested that this was, the current methodology is not especially systematic, right? If you're going to look at protocols, for example, right, it picks a set of however many protocols, but it doesn't really discuss why those protocols were chosen. Similarly, for the literature review, it picks a set of things to review and doesn't really discuss why they were chosen. And I think you can either do this in a much more systematic way and talk about, if you're doing a literature review, these are the sources you surveyed, this was the search terms, this was how you subdivided them, how you picked a representative sample, etc., etc. And that way it gives a very authoritative document with probably a much larger set of references and so on. And that would be a really impressive research contribution, but obviously a much bigger document, a much more larger project. Or you can just be clear that the authors have picked a few, as I think Nick said, a few illustrative examples to make a point, and it's not a systematic survey. And and it's just the positioning between those two approaches and make it clear: is this an authoritative survey or is this a small-scale set of case studies?
Yeah.
For example.
And again, like maybe other people need to come in and correct me, but I feel like it always kind of was the latter. I don't know that we ever talk to ourselves about, like, let's go to the data tracker or let's use Big Bang and try to figure out every single protocol and then narrow it down based on criteria. Like, it really just was, these are some really interesting open sub questions. Sure. Can we think about, examples of protocols where we could dig in and dive in and like bring forward some interesting detail. So I do always think it was the latter.
And that's the way a lot of the text reads. But then in places there's parts of especially the introductory material and the conclusions that suggest and try to claim broader authority than that. So we just need to make sure that the contextualization of the research matches the scope of the work that was actually done.
Can you just repeat that last part? I'm not sure I understood what you mean entirely.
So, I mean, the research is done in a particular way, and it's a set of case studies and so on, right? And that's fine.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the discussion in the introduction and the conclusions and the discussion around that research in the draft suggests was done in a more systematic, broader way. And we need to make sure that discussion matches the scope of the work.
Okay.
And we can either do that by changing that discussion or by changing the scope of the work. And they're both legitimate ways to go forward, but the two need to match.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for those that additional context. I think so. Nick and Niels, if you're in the chat, are having a bit of a discussion about social sciences and humanities research versus computer science. It's a very interesting discussion, but we have to wrap up, so we'll capture it in the notes because the chat will be preserved. And I think we'll move on from here. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Colin. Thanks to all of our speakers. Really just appreciate your attention and your participation at 9:30 a.m. on Monday at the IETF. I hope you have a really good rest of your week. Thank you. And thank you to Corey for taking notes. Yes. Well, it was beneficial to me.